Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
During our Farm Basics time each week, we talk about some commonly asked questions we get from non-farmers. Well, today's question is, how long can you store grain in grain bins?
Here's one of the challenges with that question. When I put grain into the bin, I don't really know how long I'm going to leave it there. If the price gets really good a month later after I put the grain in, I might sell it right then. But if the price doesn't get better and I don't need the money for a while, I might leave it in there till next summer. So sometimes I'm up in the air, and because of that, I have to try and take care of that grain just thinking I might want to hold that grain for a long time.
On our farm in the past, we've usually said, hey, we want to store this all the way through the following summer. Well, when we do that, then we dry the grain down a little bit more. So here's what I'm talking about. Normally, for corn, you can sell it at a grain elevator at 15% moisture and get no dock. That's basically the moisture they allow you to have in the grain. With soybeans, it's 13%. So we would have to dry the grain down to at least 15% on corn, 13% on beans. If we want to store it for a few months, we'd say, all right, let's knock a point or two off of that. If we want to store it way into next summer, we got to knock off even more. So a lot of times we'd go clear down to 12% moisture on that corn just to make sure that it was going to last fairly well. So that's a really big thing. With soybeans, you can just let the grain sit in the field just an extra day or two longer, and a lot of times it'll go from 13% down to 11 or 10. It's just much safer to store when it's at a nice dry moisture.
The other thing is the temperature of the grain. If you get the temperature of the grain cooler, then you aren't going to have bug issues in the grain. Now, you could freeze the grain technically over the winter in a bin. That would be okay, I guess. But once you get into the summer and spring, you know how it is when you've got a cold drink that you bring out of the refrigerator. Pretty soon it's sweating, and you could see the same thing where that grain could sweat if it's too far apart in temperature from what the ambient air temperature is. So bringing it down 10 degrees, maybe 20 degrees cooler than what the air temperature is outside is probably fine. I like to have the grain down in the 40s if I can. Then I know for sure I'm not going to have a lot of insect activity in that grain.
Couple other things I wanted to mention. One is the fines. A lot of times what happens is when you're loading a grain bin, there will be some little pieces of grain basically and dust and everything else. If that accumulates right in the middle, then that's usually where you get spoilage. So a lot of times we try to have spreaders that will spread that around the grain bin. Now, whether you have that problem or you don't, we do really like monitoring inside that bin. There are now cables that we can run inside the bin, so while we have the grain in there, we can monitor the temperature, and that is so very helpful. When grain starts to spoil, the temperature goes high. So when that happens, then we can turn the fan on and pump some more cold air in there to stop any spoilage that may be occurring, or we can know, hey, we're getting spoilage, let's get that grain out of that bin before it goes bad.
The other thing in the bin, you just want to make sure that everything is sealed up properly. You want to make sure there aren't any bugs in there ahead. There's no leaks where water could potentially get in with rain or snow. All those things can help farmers store grain for a long time. And honestly, you could store grain pretty much indefinitely if you took care of all those things.
Yep.
But unfortunately, as farmers, we can't just wait to get paid indefinitely. Eventually, we're going to need the money from that grain and we're going to need to sell it.
But we do know farmers who have stored grain for many years. Sometimes it works out great, but other times they have a bunch of spoilage in there. That's what we're trying to avoid as farmers, because basically that's lost money.
Yeah, and the big thing here too is most of the time you want those bins empty by the time you're going to harvest the next crop. So generally, 99.9% of all cases, farmers are going to try and move all that grain out before the next harvest so they have a space to bring the next harvest in.
Well, during harvest, one of the things that usually happens is we as farmers realize we did a poor job on certain weeds. Well, if you've got our Weed of the Week, we'll show you how to control it coming up later in the show.